North Korea has notified Japan that it'll launch a reconnaissance satellite sometime between tomorrow and the 1st of December. South Korea's military says this could take place early Wednesday morning. President Yoon Suk-yeol is set to ink the Downing Street Accord with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak during his state visit to the UK on cooperation in high-tech areas and the first joint sanctions against Pyongyang. Hamas says a truce deal with Israel is approaching. Eyes are on whether this could turn the tide of the nearly 2-month-long war. It's November 21st, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. North Korea notified Japan this morning that it'll launch its military reconnaissance satellite, which failed twice earlier, sometime between tomorrow and December 1st. This could take place possibly early tomorrow morning. Eyes are on whether the third launch attempt would be a success, given Russia's alleged involvement. Defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has our top story.
South Korea's defense ministry is closely looking into the possibility of North Korea's third attempt to launch a military spy satellite on November 22nd.
During the first and second launch attempts, they took place on the first day of the notice period, more specifically at dawn. We are considering that possibility, and we would also have to take the weather into consideration.
On Tuesday, North Korea notified Japan that it will attempt to send a military reconnaissance satellite into space sometime between November 22nd and December 1st. Pyongyang's failed twice before, once in May and once in August. But what's different this time is that the North is presumed to have received help from Russia. During their summit held in September, Putin promised Kim help in developing a spy satellite. A South Korean military official said Tuesday that Russian support was likely used to improve the engines, which was what led to failures in the previous attempts.
The possibility of success may be a little higher, and we must also note that there was a little more progress in the second launch than in the first.
Some experts do say, however, that Russia's involvement in the latest launch is not as dramatic as expected.
It seems likely that Russian engineers provided some advice based on data they looked at. But I don't think we can say that Russian technology is directly involved given the short development time.
The military said that the launch itself poses a threat to security, regardless of whether the launch turns out to be a success or not. It again emphasized that the launch is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions, which ban North Korean missile launches using ballistic missile technology. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And this has prompted talks between the top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, demanding that Pyongyang halt the satellite launch. The South Korean government once again says it'll take necessary measures should it happen. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jong-sil reports.
Top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan talked over the phone on Tuesday and decided to strongly demand that Pyongyang stop the launch of a military reconnaissance satellite. South Korea's Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, Kim Gun, talked with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Chung Bak and Namazu Hiroyuki and confirmed that any launch by North Korea using ballistic missile technology, even if it was used for a satellite, is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. The officials also reaffirmed that they would work closely with each other to strengthen regional deterrence and response capabilities, including security cooperation. An official from South Korea's Ministry of Unification also told reporters the same day that the ministry will take necessary follow-up measures regarding the North's official announcement of the third attempt to launch the reconnaissance satellite. The official said the launch was a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and a provocative action seriously threatening regional security. He added that South Korea, the U.S. and Japan would work closely against Pyongyang's provocations. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of State expressed its concerns on Monday local time over possible military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. He said Moscow would be violating UNSC resolutions that Russia itself voted for, and added that the country should not supply North Korea with technology that would violate the resolutions. Concerns over possible technology cooperation surfaced when North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in September at a rocket launch facility in Russia's Far East. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
The North Korean hacking group known as Kimchi was found to have hacked the email accounts of 1,468 South Koreans from March to October this year, marking a 34-fold increase compared to last year. According to South Korea's National Police Agency on Tuesday, among the hacked include 57 experts in the fields of diplomacy and security, as well as former high-ranking government officials. The agency explained the motive behind the recent attacks is the North Korean cybercrime group's attempt to steal cryptocurrency, as the scope of the targets has expanded to civilians. The police said no confidential information was stolen. Over in the UK, President Yoon Suk-yeol landed in London on Monday afternoon for his state visit. He is set to ink the Downing Street Accord with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for cooperation in high-tech areas and the first joint sanctions against Pyongyang. Correspondent Oh So-young gives us a preview.
South Korea and the United Kingdom will upgrade their relations to a global strategic partnership upon President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit this week, issuing high-tech areas of cooperation and the first joint sanctions action against North Korea's security threat. Yoon's office said Monday that Seoul and London will adopt the Downing Street Accord, setting out deeper cooperation in future trade and innovation upon 140 years of bilateral ties. Speaking to Korean expats at a banquet on Monday, shortly after touchdown, the South Korean leader hinted that the accord would expand cooperation in trade and cutting-edge sectors, as he stressed that the two countries are partners in the universal values of freedom, human rights and the rule of law.
저의 이번 방문을 통해 한영 양국은 사이버 안보와 방위 산업 등 안보 분야의 협력 체계를 새롭게 구축해 나갈 것입니다. 뿐만 아니라 한영 FTA 개정 협상을 다시 시작해서 공급망과 교육의 협력 기반을 더욱 공고하게 다져 나갈 것입니다.
This includes agreements on strengthening supply chains and joint research in critical high-tech areas such as semiconductors, artificial intelligence and quantum technology, as the two countries seek new growth engines and economic security amid trade and global uncertainties. The two countries also plan to strengthen their capabilities to respond to cyber threats by concluding a strategic cyber partnership, as well as expanding joint training and promoting joint maritime patrols to enforce UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea. This will be the first time that South Korea and the UK have performed joint operations to enforce sanctions on Pyongyang. The two countries will also pen a document on defence industry cooperation, space and clean energy. Furthermore, the Downing Street Accord will express their joint views on global affairs, including North Korea's nuclear threat, conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, and security in the Indo-Pacific. In addition, the two governments will agree to strengthen multilateralism and the rules-based international order through institutions like the UN Security Council, G20 and G7.
President Yoon's state visit will mark another 100-year leap forward in bilateral ties, which have shown a history of deep cooperation and solidarity since the first Treaty of Amity and Commerce was signed in 1883.
President Yoon's first official day of the visit begins on Tuesday. He and First Lady Kim Gon-hee will receive the full royal treatment, a guard of honour followed by a welcoming reception and lunch at Buckingham Palace. The first couple will also pay their respects to Korean war veterans and the grave of the unknown warrior at Westminster Abbey.
While reflecting on the past, President Yoon will set out a more comprehensive future partnership between the two liberal democracies based on their shared values, as he delivers a speech in English to members of both houses of parliament.
His meeting with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on Wednesday and various economic engagements, including a business forum and a roundtable of scientific minds, will put the future bilateral partnership into motion. Oh So-young, Arirang News, London.
Hamas and Israel may soon reach a truce agreement, according to the chief of the Palestinian militant group. This has been echoed by U.S. President Joe Biden earlier, saying a deal to secure the release of hostages is closer. Chung Eun-ju with the details.
The chief of Hamas told Reuters in a statement on Tuesday that the militant organization was close to reaching a truce agreement with Israel, and the group has delivered a response to Qatari negotiators. According to Reuters, Qatari mediators have been leading negotiations that could potentially lead to the release of 50 hostages in exchange for a 3-day ceasefire and further aid for Gaza. A Hamas official also recently told Al Jazeera TV that negotiations were centered on how long the truce would last, arrangements for delivery of aid into Gaza, and the exchange of Israeli hostages held by Hamas for Palestinian prisoners in Israel. Both sides would free women and children, with details being announced by Qatar. Around 240 hostages were taken during a deadly attack on Israel by Hamas on October 7th. The ferocity of the attack, which killed around 1,200 people, prompted Israel to invade the Gaza Strip. Since then, Gaza's Hamas-run government said at least 13,300 Palestinians have been killed, including at least 5,600 children and 3,550 women by an Israeli bombardment. Talk of such imminent hostage deal has been circulating for days. U.S. President Joe Biden and other U.S. officials said on Monday while speaking to reporters that a deal to secure the release of hostages being held by Hamas is close. Meanwhile, Israeli operations against Hamas in Gaza have put the spotlight on medical facilities within the enclave, with hospitals suffering power cuts and a lack of medical supplies. According to health officials in Gaza, at least 12 people were killed at the Indonesian hospital in northeastern Gaza on Sunday night after it was hit by artillery rounds. The IDF says it took action after being fired upon from the facility. 28 prematurely born babies evacuated from Gaza's biggest hospital, Al-Shifa, were taken into Egypt for urgent treatment on Monday. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
In the U.S., with the recent dismissal of OpenAI's co-founder Sam Altman, the company behind ChatGPT, hundreds of employees are threatening to quit in protest and follow the former CEO to Microsoft. Our Song Yu-jin takes a look at this major shakeup and how it'll impact the broader artificial intelligence industry.
The leadership shakeup at OpenAI, the American company behind leading AI chatbot ChatGPT, is facing a backlash. As of Monday local time, nearly all of the company's 770 employees signed a letter threatening to quit and follow ousted former CEO Sam Altman to Microsoft unless the board of directors step down. Microsoft, a close partner and the biggest investor of OpenAI, announced on Sunday that Altman will be leading its new advanced AI research team. Altman was ousted last Friday by the company's board of directors. Though the reason has not been made clear, the board's open letter said he was, quote, not consistently candid in his communications with the board. This ongoing turmoil is causing significant turbulence for the AI field. Analysts say although it's uncertain what will become of OpenAI, it's clear that Microsoft has emerged as the winner. It can now work with Altman and potentially hundreds of OpenAI scientists and developers without the oversight of the company's nonprofit board. This anticipation could be seen in Microsoft stocks on Monday.
I can't wait to see the movie version of this story because it was really a crazy weekend. But at the end result is that Microsoft stock is up because they are investing heavily and are committed to AI, and people like the growth prospects from that side of the business.
On the other hand, experts are painting a bleak picture of OpenAI's future. There are views that sustaining the company's success will be challenging if there is a mass exodus of employees. But an immediate reshuffling in the industry seems unlikely, as both Microsoft and OpenAI will need time to reorganize and rehire. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Unless more is done about climate change, the world is set to warm by 2.5 to 2.9 degrees Celsius this century, compared to pre-industrial times. That's according to the latest edition of the United Nations Environmental Programme's Emissions Gap Report, which was published on Monday. This is above the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement, which aims to keep the temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels if the 1.5 degrees limit target is to be met. The United Nations Environment Programme calls for all nations to accelerate economy-wide, low-carbon development transformations as the country's current emissions pledges would still put the world on track to warm by nearly 3 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. Samsung Electronics saw its global smartphone shipments drop in the third quarter, while its competitors Apple and Xiaomi saw theirs go up. According to market analysts for International Data Corporation on Monday, the South Korean tech giant's smartphone shipments dropped by more than 8% on-year to nearly 60 million units, despite the company occupying the top spot in the global smartphone market. With the decline in shipments, its market share also fell below the 20% mark from July to September. Meanwhile, Apple and Xiaomi, which came in second and third each, both saw their shipments go up around 2.5% compared to the previous year. Tomorrow, Wednesday, November 22nd, we celebrate Kimchi Day, and in light of this occasion, we share with you recent data that shows a record number of countries are importing this side dish. Yoon-jin has more.
South Korea's national dish, kimchi, is gaining popularity around the globe. The side dish, typically made from fermented cabbage, salt, and hot peppers, is eaten with nearly every meal in Korea. And its popularity is spreading around the world as data compiled by the Korea Customs Service showed on Tuesday that kimchi exports between January and October came to $130 million. That's a 10% on-year increase from the $118.6 million tallied for the same period last year. But also, the number of export destinations increased from 87 countries last year to 93 nations so far this year. By destination, Japan took up 40.5% of kimchi exports over the 10-month period, followed by the United States, the Netherlands, Britain, and Hong Kong. The global peak in interest for the side dish hit a record high in 2021, which was driven by increased demand from health-conscious consumers during the COVID-19 pandemic. And experts are suggesting that with the current trend, the annual kimchi exports for this year may surpass the record of $159 million set in 2021. November 22nd is celebrated in Korea as Kimchi Day, and this day has also been publicly introduced in 12 states or cities of the United States, including Washington, D.C., California, New York State, and Virginia, as well as other cities and countries like Argentina, Sao Paulo, and the Royal Borough of Kingston-upon-Thames in London. In the United States, passage of the House resolution that was introduced last April by Representative Kim Young and 14 co-sponsors aiming to officially designate November 22nd as Kimchi Day will be determined in a plenary meeting on December 6th. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
Tonight, we deliver a story of a young Korean-American girl who has touched many people's hearts with a video of her making her own DIY kimbap at a school cafeteria in New York. Or Ishi, who had a chance to speak with her about what it means to be embracing one's own culture.
Hi, my name is Avery. Here's what's in my lunchbox.
Meet Avery, a third-grade student in New York City. In a 1-minute video uploaded on the city's social media, she showed the world how to make one of her favorite foods, kimbap.
I put the seaweed on the foil, and then I usually just take the rice and put it on the seaweed and flatten it out, roll it up, and this is kimbap.
The video has over 7 million views from many who applaud Avery's confident spirit. In an interview with Arirang News, she shared more.
So I was at summer camp and I was waiting for my friends to come back from the big lunch line, and I was eating my lunch. And a grown-up walked up to me and she asked if they could film me about what's in my lunchbox because the mayor wanted to know what was in kids' lunchboxes.
On that day, she was about to enjoy her usual favorite lunch.
What's your brother's name?
I usually bring Korean food for lunch, and usually it's kimbap, and my favorite Korean lunch is kimbap.
She's a third-generation Korean American.
My mom taught me, and I eat it a lot.
And the appeal of kimbap?
I just like the combination of pop and kim.
Not much has changed in Avery's daily life.
Like, I don't really talk about it with my friends. Like, they know about it, but we don't really talk about it.
But she's touched millions of hearts that have once been too shy to embrace their culture.
We're very proud, of course, and so happy that her video has brought so much joy to so many people. And we're just glad that it was able to, as many of the commenters have said, healed some of their inner childhood trauma that they faced when they were her age growing up and bringing their own ethnic foods to school.
She's very proud of being Korean. For special days, she dresses up in her hanbok when she did shows at school, and she'll wear it, and her friends are very enthusiastic about it. She has no shame. She's very confident about everything.
Thank you. 감사합니다.
이시후, 아리랑 뉴스.
Conditions will stay above the seasonal average tomorrow. Mild temperatures of 14 degrees Celsius will prevail for Seoul tomorrow daytime. But by Friday, a dramatic change will be seen, with a strong cold front delivering a hefty dose of frigid spells. Highs will be dropping by about 10 degrees down to 1 degree on Friday. In the meantime, the air is still dry across the East Coast. With gusty winds on the forecast at times, the risk of wildfire remains high. For tonight, eastern Gangwon-do province is under dry weather advisories. Due to stagnant atmospheric conditions, some regions will see poor air for the morning hours. For the Seoul metropolitan area and Chungcheong-do provinces, air quality will temporarily stand in the bad category. Make sure to wear a mask that can filter out the dust particles. Morning temperatures in Seoul and Gwangju will be starting off at 5 degrees Celsius. We'll see more cloud coverage for the daytime. Highs in Seoul will get up to 14 degrees. Daejeon 16, Busan will reach 19 degrees. On Thursday, a low-pressure system will drop showers for central regions and Jeollado province. This weekend, frigid conditions are expected. It's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world. That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
해외에서 경기가 있을 때마다 스스로 다짐하는 말이 있어요. 나는 대한민국을 대표하는 선수이기 전에 대한민국 국민이다. 해외에서 자부심을 갖는 가장 좋은 방법은 재외선거를 놓치지 않는 거죠. 인터넷으로 쉽고 간편하게 신고 신청할 수 있는 제22대 국회의원 재외선거. 소중한 한 표를 위해 신고 신청하는 당신이 대한민국의 자부심입니다. 중앙선거관리위원회.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포터 스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Is learning Korean hard?
We'll teach you Korean the easy way.
Really? There's an easy way?
All you need to remember is 4 words. Hey chat, conversing in Korean.
떡볶이 매워요.
검은색 립스틱이요.
한국의 겨울은 추워요.
위, 아래.
오, 잘 가요. 고마워요.
빨간색보다 노란색이 잘 어울려요.
Don't miss out.
everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. South Korea is doing all it can to tame inflation, but with little signs of any progress. Consumer prices have been on a downtrend earlier this year, but starting in August, they started to accelerate again, jumping to 3.8% in October. Such inflation is even causing businesses to adopt the tactics called shrinkflation or skimpflation, reducing size or quality while maintaining their prices. Such untamed inflation in South Korea is quite the contrast to the U.S. and Europe, where consumer prices are cooling down. Why is South Korea having such difficulty when it comes to containing inflation? And what decisions are the central bank expected to make against this backdrop? For this, we invited Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Professor Song, welcome.
Yeah, good evening to you.
Welcome to the show. And
thank you.
Good evening. And we also have Professor Greg Bichuk from Stanford University. Good to have you with us, Professor Bichuk.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Now, let's first talk about South Korea's inflation. Professor Song, it stayed above 3% for the third consecutive month in October, rising 3.8% on year. Could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, recently there is a little bit surge because of some war-related some temporary problem. I believe it must be a transitory between the Israel and the Palestinian war. However, still, according to the IMF, the projection of Korean inflation rate for the end of this year is going to be 3.4% or 3.4%. So I think the inflation, because of in China, the inflation rate has only a 0.7% is projected to be at the end of the year 2023. But in Europe, several countries may suffer from some high inflation rate. Clearly, headline inflation is declining over time. And the U.S. also declining in the last October dramatically, the very low inflation rate relatively. So to that regard, what matters, what is of concern, and what is important is not just the inflation, but is our economic growth rate, because we have a serious problem with the economic growth rate.
All right, I see. Well, Professor Song, you have already mentioned the IMF's forecast, and it suggested that this year's inflation will be 3.6%, while next year's is likely to be 2.4%. Though it is expected to reach the target of 2% by late next year, this is much slower than expected, right?
Oh, I don't think so, because clearly, because in last year and the year ago, in the year 2022, there is a very critical paper has been published, and it says the U.S. economy may need some 6% unemployment rate and persistent inflation rate for the next 4 or 5 years. And also, Larry Summers has mentioned that kind of some very difficult situation caused by the persistent inflation. However, we have seen that inflation turns out to be very transitory and temporary one. Clearly, there is some indicator of the declining inflation even in last year, according to some house price and the owner's equivalent rent has been, because it has some tendency to maintain, because once the contract is made, and then its effect has some persistent effect on the price. Therefore, clearly there is a possibility of the inflation should decline over time. However, it was denied, and then Larry Summers and the other economists argued that we may need a very persistent high level of interest rate, but it is not anymore true right now.
All right, I see your point. But what is true is that we are suffering from the ongoing inflation right now. And Professor Bichuk, companies have been implementing business tactics such as shrinkflation and skimpflation. What are they, and are there any related laws or systems that can prevent this?
Sure. So inflation that we've been talking about is when prices for the same item increase. Shrinkflation is kind of a cute name for something similar, which is companies keep prices the same, but they save costs by reducing the quality or the quantity of the item. Ultimately, this kind of has the same economic cause and effect as inflation, but it takes a different form and it's sometimes harder to notice. So let me give you kind of a funny example of this. I think you probably know Oreo cookies. They're like the 2 chocolate cookies with cream filling in the middle. So some people in the US lately have claimed that they've shrunk the amount of cream filling that they put between the 2 cookies. So I actually like the chocolate part better, so I'm okay with that. But this kind of like less cream in your Oreos is a perfect example of shrinkflation. Instead of raising the price of the cookie, they give a kind of sneakily less cookie for the same price. Now, like clearly this is something that's much easier to do with some goods than others. You can kind of reduce how much snack you put in the snack bag. But it's illegal to outright lie about what you're selling. So you can't say that you're selling someone 1 liter of gasoline, but then only give them 0.9 liters. That'd be illegal. But there's no law that says, you know, Oreos have to be the same every year. So it's really up to consumers to sort of look at what they're buying and notice what's going on. You know, the thing with shrinkflation is quality is going down. So what that means is the quality adjusted price is increasing. That's just another form of inflation. Prices are going up for the same thing you get. And when economists calculate inflation for official statistics, they're not totally naive about this. They do their best to take these changes in quality into account. So shrinkflation does, at least in theory, show up in official measures, although things like Oreo cookie filling quantity decreasing, these are subtle things that are probably missed in a lot of official measures.
All right, I see. Well, thank you, Professor Butchuk, for kindly explaining what shrinkflation and skimflation are. Now, Professor Song, the government is not only trying to clamp down on those prevalent business tactics, but also it launched task forces under several ministries to monitor the prices of key food and other major items. But some say these will not be that effective. What is your view on this, and what additional measures should be put in place?
Yeah, the price control is always, according to the traditional economics perspective, it is a bad idea. And but however, there is no rule but there is no exception but rule. There is no rule but exception. I'm sorry about that. So it means that some price control would be effective to cool down the inflation. So historically, as early as 1947, under the Truman administration in the U.S., the government has adopted some kind of price control because at that time was a transition period from the some military industry because of the war has been taking place for the past 5 years in the World War II. Then the U.S. economy needs adjust and reallocation of the resources for the production of consumer goods. Therefore, it needs some time, and the hysteresis plays a role, and the lag always out there. Therefore, as long as this turns out to be a temporary and transitory price inflation, then government temporary control, restraint of the price increase, because the sellers, they would like to take advantage or exploit the opportunity to earn more profit through the price gouging. As a result, the government control would be effective. Right now in Korea, the problem is, as I mentioned earlier, the growth rate is low and the domestic economy is very bad. So in that situation, just a simple price control to be effective, it should be only applied in the limited point of time until just 3 months or 4 months or something like that. And then the government should make some other steps to reinvigorate the economic growth rate and return to some normal situation, because this is a very, to me, it sounds like a Korean economy is very abnormal right now.
Right, I see. So the price control should be applied only for a limited amount of time, because the local economy is right now quite in a serious situation. I understand your point. Now, up until now, South Korea is struggling to contain. We have been talking about how South Korea is struggling to, contain the inflation. But let's turn our eyes to other major economies. And so, Professor Buchak, the U.S. Consumer Price Index slowed to 3.2% last month, its coolest rate since July. And Eurozone inflation also fell below 3%. Could you tell us more about what led to this fall in inflation?
Sure. So the big driver of reduced inflation in the U.S., and I think this is also true in the Eurozone as well, has been the decline in energy prices, so natural gas and oil. These prices, they tend to be super volatile due to kind of constant supply shifts and demand shifts in the global economy. So as Professor Song mentioned, on the supply side, there were these worries about supply disruptions due to conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. So far, these disruptions haven't really materialized in a really persistent way, disrupting the supply of oil. On the demand side, energy prices, they sort of just tend to follow economic growth. So if there's more economic activity, you just need more energy to do it. And global economic growth has been a little bit slower than a lot of people expected, particularly outside of the US. So you put together kind of relatively good news on the supply side, fewer disruptions that were expected, with less demand globally, and that just sort of causes energy prices to grow more slowly. And that's contributed to lower inflation in the US. One thing I should mention going forward is because energy prices are so volatile and they're often moving up and down for reasons outside of the Fed's control, the Fed is often paying attention to an inflation measure that excludes food and energy. You may have heard of this. It's called the core CPI. And that number is actually still a little bit higher. It's around 4%. And what's keeping that number high in the U.S. is mostly housing costs, actually. So there's a lot to say about that, but kind of long story short, there's a big housing shortage in the U.S., particularly in cities where people really want to live, like New York or San Francisco. And unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, that's mostly outside of the Fed's control, and that problem is kind of unlikely to resolve itself soon.
All right, I see. So I understand that core inflation is still high and we need to consider that factor. But Professor Song, Washington's slowing consumer prices in October are quite reinforcing the sentiment that the U.S. economy is set to enter a Goldilocks period with moderate growth and low inflation. How do you see the U.S. economy right now?
Yeah, overall evaluation of the U.S. economy performance is they have succeeded in achieving the soft landing, because traditionally very hard landing or so without any very high level of interest rate or similar economic conditions such as recess, only those recess similar condition could make the inflation to cool down. But however, successfully and fortunately, this inflation has been declining. And Professor Buchak has already mentioned several countries, but what I would like to say in Europe, for example, United Kingdom, is its projected growth rate is, let me see, yeah, it's 0.5% right now here in this year. And whereas the projected consumer price in 2023 is 7.7%. So whereas in Germany is a negative 0.5 percentage point growth rate. And then the CPI is expected to be at the end of the year 2023 is 6.3%. So that means the European countries suffered so much from such very severe stagflation. So, however, the U.S. is amazing because their performance is projected growth rate is 2.1%, whereas the projected consumer price only 4.1%. So the growth rate is a real growth rate. So nominal growth rate is much higher. And then when I look at some other, such as, for example, Japan's projected real GDP growth rate is 2 percentage points. It's surprise, much better than South Korea. And these two biggest economies has performed, and real growth rate is has reached the 2% point. Considering the size of total GDP, this is a huge achievement. And the consumer price for Japan is 3.2%. This is very good news for the Japan because Japan has suffered so much from the deflation rather than inflation. So therefore, considering this situation, and another one is the People's Republic of China. Even though we have seen there is a problem with the Chinese economy, but real growth rate is still, they have reached a 5 percentage point for the year 2023, whereas the problem in China is deflation. Inflation is only 0.7%. So if they go this way in China's economy, might suffer from so much from the deflation situation. So in order to break out this trap, the Chinese government needs some very expansionary policy, and also they want to some normalize trade relationship with the United States. And the United States also, they would like to make some hospitable relationship with China because in year 2024, the U.S. economy is projected growth rate is declined very much because they have performed too good to maintain. So that is the current world situation right now.
I see. Now, I understand that several countries are showing economic resilience, as our Professor Song said. But Professor Buchak, after some time, many expect the U.S. economy to be weakened and the Fed to cut interest rates by as much as 275 basis points in 2024. When do you think the pivot will come and to what extent? All right, it seems that we are seeing technical glitches. And so, Professor Buchak, I will come to you later. Professor Song, do you mind answering the question for me?
Oh, sure. Would you say again, please, briefly?
Very briefly.
Yeah. Would you say again the question?
Yes.
Because I didn't pay attention to the question.
All right. So I understand that several countries are seeing economic resilience, but many expect the U.S. economy to be weakened after some time and the Fed to cut interest rates by as much as 275 basis points in 2024. When do you think the pivot will come and to what extent?
Because the current world economic outlook is very mixing. I mean, because even some countries clearly show the resilience, particularly in the African countries and developing countries. The problem is developed countries, particularly European countries, suffered so much. So to that regard, I would like to see the recent development in South America, Brazil. Brazil has their projected real GDP is 3.1% for 2023, and they may continue this kind of some very sustainable resilience of the economy. Whereas their consumer price inflation is expected to be 4.7% and remains so at that level. So as you look around, the Chinese economy, even though they have shown some substantial growth rate, 5%, but their inflation is too low. So this cannot be sustained because in order to support or bolster the growth rate, some level of inflation is necessary. But we have no idea, there is no such a golden rule for the best inflation rate because 2% is happened to be chosen by some New Zealand economist. I can't remember his name, but this is just an accidental choice. So it means that what is the very optimal or the best level of inflation? That's up to the country's specific surroundings and the conditions and the economic stage. Therefore, we have to clearly, that is clearly shown in the recent speech by the IMF economist Gopinath. What she has mentioned is the challenging issue is that different countries should have some tailor-made their own fiscal policy and monetary policy because each country, different sectors, different industry have different problems. Therefore, we cannot have some unilateral some steps to take care or to cure all the problems. So as you see, the different level of inflation persists around the world differently, and the different growth rate. Therefore, each country may need some specific, their own tailor-made policy.
All right, I cannot agree more. Now, Professor Butchak, one thing for sure is that we are seeing the reversal of the inflation rate between South Korea and the United States happening for the first time in more than 6 years. Is this going to have any impact on the South Korean economy?
Yeah, sorry for dropping off. I guess we have some shrinkflation on Zoom here. I think that the South Korean and U.S. numbers are actually very close. I wouldn't read too much into these small differences. And if you sort of put these latest numbers aside, which are really pretty modest increases, I think the good news is that South Korea has had relatively low and very stable rate of inflation for a really long time. I would actually totally agree with what Professor Song said earlier. What's really striking to me more than inflation in Korea is this very unusual combination that's forecast by the IMF of very low unemployment paired with very low growth. So unemployment, the unemployment rate in South Korea is about 2%. And as I mentioned, the U.S. Unemployment rate is about 4%. That people, if you ask people in the U.S., they'll look at that 4% number and say, well, that's great, that's full employment. So why do we think like 4% is full employment and not 0%? The answer is that in sort of a growing normal economy, there's a lot of turnover. You know, new businesses are started, old ones close, employment turns over, people search for new and better jobs. Think of like the drama going on at OpenAI. In an economy like that, you expect some natural rate of unemployment that reflects this kind of healthy creative process. But then when you see numbers far below that, without significant inflation, like what's forecast in Korea, you might think of that as a sign of some sort of stagnation or things being a little bit too stable. There's not enough of this so-called creative disruption. So amazingly, you know, like South Korea's unemployment rate has only been above 4% for a few months out of the past 20 years. So on one hand, that's remarkable stability. That's a great thing. But on the other hand, as that number drifts towards 1% as the IMF forecasts, you might wonder if there's some sort of lack of business dynamism going on. So, you know, if I were the policymaker, I wouldn't be so worried about sort of short-term or medium-term inflation. I'd be more worried about that lack of growth over the longer term.
All right, I see your point, Professor Butchak. Now, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask this last question to Professor Song. The Bank of Korea will have a rate-setting meeting at the end of this month, and based on the discussion we have had up until now, what do you think the central bank's decision will be?
Currently, the chairman of Bank of Korea, Chairman Lee, has, I think he put too much weight on the inflation rate, because as you see, our inflation rate is not any more concern, I believe. And the problem is, therefore, I would like to suggest considering some decrease of the interest rate to bolster some the economic growth rate. Also, what is important, the fiscal policy is necessary, but because of considering some general election, which will be held next year, March or April. So that is, that could be some kind of, it could be used as some foundation on which the fiscal policy is expanded, or that could be some moment or point where the Korean economy has suffered. So Professor Butchak has mentioned the low unemployment rate of South Korea is very promising. Yeah, I agree with that. But however, look into details, then the South Koreans are the workers, they are forced to work longer because their pension, the moment of pension receiving has been delayed. Therefore, to that regard, as long as the working people and the low unemployment rate is very good for the economy, however, the inequality of the income and wealth has been diverged further. So that is a kind of dilemma of the Korean economy.
All right, I see. So our Professor Song's words were that we need to focus more on growth rather than inflation right now. I see your point, Professor. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Song and Professor Butchak, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and good evening to you and Mr. Butchak.
Thank you, Professor. All right. That's all from Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.